Welcome to the Inspiration Contagion podcast, where we spread inspiration one story at a time. I am your host, Holly Jean Jackson. Each episode spotlights and interviews one transformational leader, their stories, and their advice for how you too can lead yourself and others through inspiration. If you are a visionary seeking to uplevel your leadership skills, then this is the podcast for you. I invite you today to spread inspiration like a contagion. Welcome to the Inspiration Contagion movement. Welcome to episode 24 of the Inspiration Contagion podcast. This week's episode will also be available on YouTube as we're recording live, so be sure to check that out in the show notes. On today's show, we have Teri Cochrane. Teri is an integrative practitioner and thought leader in sustainable health and longevity. She is the founder of the Global Sustainable Health Institute and has developed the Cochrane method, which integrates a multi-level bio-individualized metabolic health modality. Teri specializes in complex health conditions. She also serves to maximize the human potential in ballerinas, professional athletes, and Olympic hopefuls. Teri has a private clinical practice in the Metro Washington, D.C. area. She launched her groundbreaking and Amazon best-selling new release book in 2018, The Wildatarian Diet, Living as Nature Intended. Teri received her Bachelor of Science from the University of Florida and an advanced degree from Huntington School of Health Sciences. She is trained in craniosacral, herbology, healing touch, and is a certified coach practitioner. Teri has also spent nearly 20 years as an executive for a Fortune 500 company. Teri believes longevity starts in the womb. Welcome, Teri.
Thank you, Holly. So good to be with your audience.
Yeah, it's so great to have you here. That's quite an introduction. I'm so excited to have you on the show. And with that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, as you noted, I've had two very wonderful careers, the first of which was a 20-year career in corporate America. I worked as a commercial real estate lending executive and then went on to run a business unit for Freddie Mac. And so my whole role was around risk management, trying to seek equity on both sides of a deal and to really build relationships with my clients as well as my employees. But my son was born premature. He was my first, and I went the traditional route, seeking out doctors, pediatricians, allergists. And by the age of 3, we were told he would most likely have brain seizures, that he wouldn't grow past 5'4". By this time, he had life-threatening asthma. He had failure to thrive. He had the bone density of a 19-month-old at 3. He was barely walking. He was barely talking. And so when we received that diagnosis, that news, I thought, well, we'll make a go of it. I'm a Cuban refugee, and so we're into the solution-seeking mindset. But sometimes there's a greater voice that comes, and the voice was, well, wow, what if it doesn't have to be this way? And that sent me down his healing path. And this was before Google and the internet was just starting. He'll be 26 next week. And I made it my mission to be the risk manager for my son. I was a risk manager for billions of dollars of assets. I now became his health risk manager and just went into a deep dive of research. And within 4 days of figuring it out, if you will, after volumes of research and talking to other health practitioners and family members, families whose children had gone through similar situations, I hit a, oh my goodness, it's the assimilation of when you hit the tipping point of knowledge. And I realized that the food that I was feeding him was actually poisoning him, and that his adrenals had really been impacted, and his whole endocrine system was not sustaining the mountains of steroids and bronchodilators that he had been given to save his life. So I became his first, or actually he became my first client, and I became his first holistic health coach. So I decided to leave my career and go back to school. And so now, fast forward 15 years later, he's a wonderfully healthy man, doing really great work in the world. And he's very robust. And so he was the catalyst for all of these clients that have been the beneficiaries of my work through his lens initially.
That is an incredible story. And it saddens me in some ways that, other parents out there might just take that news from an authority figure like a doctor and just accept that reality. So for people that are facing maybe a similar situation, what advice do you have for keeping them strong and advocating for your children?
Well, I think we have to be our greatest authority for our children and for ourselves, and certainly for our family. So whoever takes the gauntlet in a family unit, that we listen to that deeper knowing. And if it doesn't feel right, there's a lot of pressure to do certain things by authority figures because that's what they know. But just like I tell my clients, if what I share with you is not aligned with your greater knowing, then we're going to have a dialogue about it, and we'll go deeper on that because you are your highest authority of your body. And so to really move from fear and lack of information to informed decision making, and that requires some responsibility on our part because we can't just expect to be given a pill or told something and then take it and then not be responsible for potential consequences. But in the age of information and in the age of this, what I believe what we've developed here is beyond functional medicine. I have a naturopathic doctor that works in my office, trained under my methodology. But it's really to become our own advocate and to keep informing your knowledge base, because especially in this season, this novel season of this, virus that has basically hit the brakes on our world, it's more than ever, it's important that we are authorities of our body and we move from fear and paralysis to informed decision making and action to improve our situation. And fear, we know, actually lowers the immune system tremendously. So being in fear does not help the situation. Being a pragmatic, responsible steward of our bodies is a better approach.
Yeah, I love that. And it's a great reminder. I completely agree. I remember I used to be such a germaphobe, like terrified and obsessive about germs. And I was able to push through that. And then the pandemic started, which is kind of one of my worst nightmares. And it's been a difficult balance of, like you said, informed action where you're aware of your surroundings, you're listening to your body, but you're staying informed with the news, but not to the degree of, like you said, where you're just constantly in fear because that depletes your immune system. So it's a really tricky balance right now. Yeah. So, Teri, I wanted to ask you, what makes you such an inspirational leader, or what's your secret sauce?
Well, I was inspired by my personal situation, and I start movements. I'm a movement maker, and when we look at the physiology and the physics of who we are in constant motion, and things have to keep evolving and changing. And so I believe that first, to be a leader, we learn and we teach by learning. And we learn by teaching, but then we teach by example. So the greatest way to teach is to learn as you're teaching. But when you become so facile at it, then you're actually just teaching by example. And because it becomes part of our matrix, that we are just that. And it's not something that we have to think about anymore. And so when I established the Wilditarian diet, living as nature intended, it was really establishing a movement of thinking differently on how our macro system of our environment is affecting our microsystem and our microbiology, and how our thinking is affecting the greater planetary electromagnetic field. We are circuits and we're in constant motion. And so these movements of higher frequency thinking and being creates mass, which then creates others around it moving towards it. We gravitate towards something that has gravity and mass. And so movements are created when we establish that mass. And I believe that through the thousands of clients that have been through my practice and have been the beneficiaries of this information and then become a disciple of this truth, it creates a movement. And right before we started this session, I just had a young lady, a brand new client. She found out about me through someone who has a healthcare practice, and she was told, oh my gosh, my best friend went to see this practice and she no longer has Hashimoto's. Go see this woman. My client today had Hashimoto's. And so that's the energy of movement. That's her friend's friend told her about me. And so when we are so inspired because of our own personal journey, when we've been told you have an autoimmune condition, that means autoimmunity stays with you. Well, this woman, that autoimmunity is in her rear view mirror. And so she felt compelled to share that story with her friend, whom then shared it with my client.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you're creating this ripple effect by creating positive changes and shifts in people's lives so that they're actually empowered and able to live their life really fully. But I also like that you said that you have to walk that talk to create that ripple effect and that movement, and that the best way to teach is to lead by example, by actually being the essence of the movement you're creating. So that's really powerful, Teri.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what does inspiration mean to you?
So inspiration means, if you look at the root word, it means to inspire. It means to breathe in. And we are breathing life. When we breathe life into something, things change. And so we know that everything on the planet is made of energy, and energy seeks life. And so we seek life through those three molecules of water, because we're 70% water, part of it being oxygen. And so water creates change. And so to inspire is to really breathing in a new thought pattern, a new way of being, a new way of acting. And so as we change, we go from thinking to action to behavior to pattern building to habits. And so when we are developing habits, we are inspired by that process. But first we have to breathe in that new thought, that new insight.
I love that. It's so easy to take for granted breathing, right? We could just breathe automatically. Luckily, our brains are really smart. They keep us alive. But like you're saying, breathing in with intention so that you're breathing the right things into your system takes some work. So for people that are listening and maybe they're going down that fear rabbit hole, or they're having some health issues, what is perhaps one step that they could take towards this inspiration and inhaling life versus fear or anxiety?
That's a great question. I've developed a little practice that I call stop, drop, and roll. And it's sort of like, it's a new play on the firemen stop, drop, and roll when there's a fire. And so if we are in a state of fear, it really is paralyzing. And so first is tuning into our body and saying, am I in a state of fear? Or am I in a state of expansion? Am I being inspired? Am I breathing deeply? Because when we are in fear, we don't breathe anymore. We don't do that deep diaphragmatic breathing. We stop breathing here. So we're not being fully oxygenated. And so just tuning into the body. Am I inspiring right now? Am I being inspired? Am I breathing in? There's something greater breathing me. Am I allowing it to flow through me? So if I'm not, I'm going to stop whatever thought I was having in the moment. And then I'm going to drop it. And the way we drop it is we have to move energy. Energy is as we talked about, movements create movements, right? And so we're in constant motion. And when energy and fear enters our field, it creates a circuit break. And so we've stopped that movement. And so moving literally is, I'm going to shake that fear off. I'm going to walk. I'm going to run. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to do Tai Chi, Qigong, whatever. You can go into the bathroom and just do a power pose. But I'm going to move something through my body, and then I'm going to, so stop, we're going to drop it and move it through. And then I'm going to roll into a higher vibration thought. What was it that brought me joy? And it doesn't have to be that trip to Fiji. It could be that conversation you had. I had a wonderful conversation with a really great friend of mine who's a wonderful doctor down in Tampa yesterday. That conversation brought me so much joy. And so this morning, as I was preparing for my day, I reached out to that memory and brought it in. And that joy is going to elevate my immune system. It's going to inspire me. I was inspired by our conversation. And so stop, drop, and roll into that higher frequency vibration thinking.
I am so glad I asked that question. That is really, really great. I love stop, drop, and roll. I will have to obviously give you credit for it, but share that with clients when they're stuck in these, negative thought patterns, because I do affirmation work, but I love the stop, drop, and roll because it helps you in the moment break out of that habit and that pattern. That's amazing. Thanks, Teri. So Teri, how do you define success for yourself, and how did you arrive at this definition?
So success is, first of all, we have to be able to own doing good things. We have to be able to own making impact. If we don't own it, we can't be truly successful. And that's coming not from a place of ego, but from a place of agape, which is the highest form of egoless love. And so in order to be successful, you have to love yourself first and own the gifts, and then hone the gifts and practice the gifts. Because we can have certain gifts that we say no to. We won't succeed in that gift that was a kernel because it wasn't nurtured. And so success is defined by owning the gift, honing the gift, loving yourself, walking in humble influence. So as influencers, the bigger we get, the easier it is to get stuck with a shiny object. Oh, look who I'm working with, or look at what podcast I just hit. And so bringing it back to who is it that I'm really serving? And that's where you get into that humble influence, which keeps us grounded. And I believe walking in humble influence with really love of self is defined success.
I really like that answer. Yeah, it's so easy to get carried away with how society would define success or let others define success for us. So I love that you're defining it as loving yourself, having that self-awareness to identify that skill set, really amplifying, up-leveling those skills and superhero powers that each of us has, and then remaining in humble influence and not forgetting your mission and who you're serving. That's really beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we all know that on the way to defining success for ourselves or achieving that, there's some challenges along the way. So what are some of the challenges or obstacles that you faced on the way on your journey to success?
Wow. Well, I always try to find the good in things. I was a pioneer in my work. I still believe I'm at the forefront of this health model that I've created through the Cochrane method. But I didn't have a lot of support within my familial unit. That was a big obstacle. But I just kept my head down, and I knew that something greater was breathing me. And whether or not I had the support that I felt would have helped me, it didn't matter. And so I had to break through that. And in the end, it all worked out. And sometimes the medical community didn't understand my work, but now I feel like it's being so embraced with amazing doctors that refer and want to learn. We've had so many requests to learn my methodology. And also just sometimes, we get afraid. Fear will walk in, and that's where we have to stop, drop, and roll. When we have these thoughts of, well, am I really doing this? Should I be doing this? What's the greater cost of doing this? And I'm not talking about from a financial perspective, but sometimes we have to give up of ourselves. I work very long hours, but when we shift the word work to flow, it actually shifts our flow in our body. So you're part of the evolution of success is hitting those stumbling blocks. And one of the great teachers said, when you think you've run out of every option, you haven't. And so it's going beyond what we think we can do. And so those stumbling blocks actually create an opportunity for up-leveling, because you're going to be at a higher frequency. We exist at the frequency at which we vibrate. And so I believe that some of these stumbling blocks is an opportunity for us to move to a higher frequency. And so the universe puts these stumbling blocks in our path so we can choose, because it's always a choice, to move on instead of staying at this frequency. Because once we move on to a higher frequency, we now match to that higher frequency match, which will bring us new insights. It will bring us new collaborators. Out of the blue is not out of the blue. We have now hit a new frequency match when these things start really, really catalyzing and momentum starts really being put forth.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I love that reframe on work to flow. And also, when we are in that frequency and up leveling that frequency, I've found, even with the podcast, right? The people that I've been able to bring on the show, I think it's because the idea behind it is to share light with the world when we're having so much fear and so much negative news. And that's really resonating with people. So when you really tune in and listen, it's amazing the doors that serendipitously open because you are at that higher frequency. So I agree, like each of these is an opportunity for us to grow and up level ourselves.
Indeed.
Yeah. So what is a story of inspiration you're known for? You shared the story about your son. Is there something else that you would like to share?
Well, I think that honestly, I feel so blessed. It's like I get sprinkled with fairy dust on a daily basis, because I'm so inspired by the stories of my clients when they come in and they no longer are facing an autoimmune condition, or that infertility, which they were told you can't even go to a fertility clinic because your numbers are so off in your endocrine system that you're not even a candidate for fertility. And we help them conceive without any drugs, and they have a happy, healthy baby. Or when we have these young adults that are considering self-harm or started self-harming themselves, and then they end up writing a blog about their way out within a couple of months, and then they become an inspiration. Those are the things that really move me. It's one of my sayings is, when you give good without expectation, great comes back to you. It's that circuit completion, right? And so I am so incredibly fortunate to be that catalyst of inspiration for others by, one, being a role model. I'm not perfect, but I try to walk the walk that I ask my clients to walk, and I ask those that hear me and follow me. But also, each one of my clients is a story of inspiration, and it's just such a beautiful, beautiful welling up of the heart center.
Yeah, I like that saying of that if you give good, great will be returned to you. Not to mention, when we give good and we're of service to others, I think that elevates our frequency and our energy, because it just feels so great to be generous to others and to help others. That's what we're built for.
Absolutely. And that's when the heart centers connect. We know that we have an electromagnetic frequency, and the heart is the largest electromagnetic field that we emanate from our human body. And I am fortunate again enough to make heart-centered connections with my clients on a daily basis. And that is a gift. This morning, I have a client who is having a thyroidectomy. I reached out to them this morning, holding them in light. They're very grateful for that. I didn't have to do that, but I wanted to do that because that's part of creating a space for them to be in less fear and to know that we're not alone.
Yeah.
So that's a beautiful thing. And again, when we shift our mission from the word work, which is a lower frequency, and I said this before, but to flow, I'm in flow. When I'm in my office, yes, the work is rigorous. Yes, the work is long hours, but I'm in the flow, and so it becomes less so. And I'm inspired. I'm inspired by what we do and what we offer here.
Yeah, well, and I think it goes back to your definition of success. When we love ourselves and we're really in tune with why we're here and we're doing that work or really that flow, it's easier, it's lighter, and it is inspiring. It is exciting. You wake up and you're excited to start the day versus if you're not aligned with that, then you get out of bed and you're like, oh, I have to go to work today.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, Teri, you're clearly a movement leader. Can you tell us about the movement that you've built?
I'd love to. So I have created a movement called Wilditarianism. And the Wilditarian movement is defined as living by existing as nature intended. So to be a Wilditarian is to live and exist as nature intended. That is to be in the frequency of the vibration of all that surround us in its natural state. And so the Wilditarian movement was born from a client that had end-stage cancer. It turned out it was an amyloid-based condition. At that time, amyloids were just coming into our knowingness. I did more research with my research scientist on my staff at the time and found that it was coming from our food supply. And so this gentleman is now cancer-free 8 years later. And so he was the catalyst for the Wilditarian movement, which is an inspired, sorry about that, my video froze. It's an inspired movement to understand our genetic tendencies and our current state of health, which will not be static over time. So to be a Wilditarian is to eat sustainably raised, wild-caught meats and shellfish, and fish, or you can be a plant-based, low mycotoxin Wilditarian. So we say we're equal opportunity. You can be land-based, you can be sea-based, you can be combo platter-based, you can be vegetarian and vegan. Along that continuum, it's eating to your genetic blueprint and your current state of health in a bio-individualized way. And in doing that, you start living as nature intended, and part of the nature is the internal nature of you. And my nature may be different from your nature. So we all need to seek to live as nature intended within the microbiology and the energy of us. And when we do, we then emanate a greater frequency and we live in vital and vibrant health. And that is one that becomes sustainable.
Yeah, I love that. And for people that maybe they're not as nerdly as we are with health, because like I understand everything you're sharing, but can you share some examples of what you mean by individualized diets for individuals, but also the fact that you have to be working with someone like yourself to figure out what that looks like for your microbiome and beyond. And you're more of the expert there than I am, but maybe explain that for folks that aren't used to it, as well as the how to eat low toxicity, because I'm sure people are like, what does that mean?
I'd love to. So I've developed within the Wilditarian construct, there are three major players, I call them the big three, that I believe account for contributing to the majority of today's chronic conditions. And that is protein, fat, and sulfur malabsorption with a little side plate of oxalate malabsorption. And so through the body of work that we've accumulated, we are no longer able to manage the protein loads from domesticated animals, and there's studies out there that show it, and my clinical outcomes prove it. Chicken and beef are the most studied, but because of their crowding conditions, they're now creating these indigestible protein structures by the name of amyloids. The body needs protein for millions of microchemical reactions in the body to help us build hormones and tendons and our cognitive function and all of the communication between the cells and the protein receptor sites on the cell membrane. Yet we are now in a situation where we're less able to break down these proteins because of these animals and their crowding conditions. And so when we ingest them, we can no longer break them down. We're not disassembling the protein into the amino acid structure for recombining into doing all those things I just talked about. And then as well, these things are starting to accumulate in our tissues as tissue specific, for example, the brain in Alzheimer's or kidney for kidney disease, or even systemically, for example, the amyloids of amyloidosis in cancer or conjugated lymphocytic leukemia, these blood cancers. And so we have found that when you bring down the amyloid burden by eating the animal meat, which is wild caught, that lives as nature intended themselves, that's not crowded, that we have a lower amyloid burden. Similarly, sulfur, which we need sulfur to convert to sulfate to help our bones and our tendons and our neurotransmitters and our gut health. Yet what's happened is the Roundup that's sprayed on our crops has an herbicide called glyphosate, and glyphosate interrupts our body's ability to process sulfur to its end state, especially if we have a genetic predisposition. And so sulfur, in the work of Dr. Stephanie Seneff, who's a brilliant biochemist at MIT, has elucidated just how deleterious that glyphosate is, both in protein metabolism, but I've also linked it to sulfur metabolism, as has she. And so when we're eating gluten or non-organic crops, that sulfur burden becomes a big deal, especially if we are, myself included, genetically vulnerable. And then the fat metabolism goes to the fact that our body, in our modern culture, especially in this pandemic environment, is releasing massive amounts of stress hormones. I call them the dirty cupcakes, the hormones of cortisol and epinephrine, which are intended to save our lives in short bursts, but when they become chronic, they actually increase the pathogenicity of what we have living in our microbiome, turning on potentially viruses and bacteria and parasites that were living and coexisting with us happily. It also leaks the gut. It also makes us more fat malabsorbed. And when we're fat malabsorbed, our endocrine function, our hormone function, our insulin function becomes dysregulated. Our neurotransmitters, which are actually neurohormones, so our mood balancers become really disrupted. And so looking at those big three relative to your genetic tendencies will make you a certain archetype of Wilditarian. And I've developed 4 major archetypes. And yes, you can come see us, and we'd love to see you. We see very complex cases from all over the globe, but you can take a quiz on our website, find out what kind of Wilditarian you are, eat to your wild type, and people will get better. I had a client, not even a client, I met somebody in a bathroom at a conference, never met her before. She recognized me, ran up to me. She said, "Oh my gosh, I read your book, and that 20-year rash I had went away in 3 weeks. I am now a low sulfur Wilditarian." All those healthy foods that I was eating were actually contributing to this chronic rash that nothing could take care of.
Yeah, it's really wild. I've been gluten, dairy, sugar, soy free for a long time, and I eat organically and whatnot. But it's wild if you go deeper and deeper into your specific diet and what your microbiome needs. There are things you're eating that seem healthy that are not good for you. So if you are out there and you're stuck and everything is not working within the system, Teri is a great resource, and I highly recommend taking that quiz. Thanks for explaining that so that folks understood more specifically what you were saying there. So Teri, what are some of the pillars of building a movement that catches fire like the one that you've built?
Well, I believe that one of the pillars is you have to have something that is inspired. Back to that inspiration, that something greater breathe through you to gently nudge you into being that person that represents that thing. If you're doing it for the wrong reasons, if it's not an inspired catalyst, that's one of the very biggest pillars is inspiration. You have to be inspired. The second thing is it has to be collaborative. We can't do this alone. We can be the leader, but part of my work has been informed by all of the greats that came before me, the works of Pizzorno, Dr. Pizzorno, Dr. Jeff Bland, the work of Deepak Chopra, the wonderful work of Joe Dispenza, Bruce Lipton, Dr. Tato Vakaitis is an incredible genius. All of those that are going and seeking a better way. And so to know that we are just taking, as movements are created, we look to taking pieces and creating a new tapestry for ourselves that is inspired by their work. And so to really honor those teachers, to honor those guides and mentors, and to also credit them for the inspiration and how you assembled from their beautiful work. And I've had the opportunity to work with all these individuals, and it's just been just an incredible blessing. And the third thing is to seek to our sacred friends, those that have been the stumbling blocks, and a nod is an opportunity for us to grow. So when we are hitting a stumbling block, I believe that we are on a precipice of reaching a higher frequency. And so putting that third pillar of when it gets rigorous, find the good and understand that you're on the cusp of maybe a new discovery or someone that may come into your sphere that may influence that next movement. And so moving from resistance to I'm on the edge, I'm on the cusp of a higher frequency manifestation that's going to draw something in.
Those are really wise pillars. I love the first one of inspiration and making sure you're coming from the right place. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with clients and their vision is amazing, but there's something around their mindset or where they're coming from or the why behind it that's off. It's not aligned. And that's why they're doing all the right things. But when it's not from the right place, people can sense that just intuitively. And then collaboration and community is so important. You can't really do anything amazing without an amazing community of people that are a couple steps ahead of you that you can learn from. Like you said, crediting them for what they've shared and how that's influenced the new tapestry that you're putting together for your program. And I love the shift in perspective on looking at obstacles or, what feels like a wall or a burden as an opportunity for growth to that next level. Those are wonderful pillars.
Thank you. And I think community is just almost, it can stand alone as another pillar. And JJ Virgin has been such an incredible inspiration mentor for so many of us that have brought us together and allowed us to really be in an ecosystem of curiosity and co-collaboration and joint elevation. One of my dear friends, Sharon Melnick, says that a woman in her power raises everyone around her. And I think JJ's been that inspiration for so many of us that has created just immense catalysts for deeper and beautiful change on this planet.
Yeah. And I mean, we're meant for that community. And it's amazing when you find people that you can collaborate and create with. It just brings it to that next level beyond what you could create alone. So that's wonderful. And yes, JJ has a very special community. I've had a lot of people on the podcast from her community, and they are just the most inspiring people I've met. It's incredible. So, Teri, how do you gain trust, support, and buy-in for your movement?
Well, I believe that it's really a grassroots effort. When I left my career almost 17 years ago, and everybody thought I was really making a mistake because I had done very well. And why was I leaving? I was in my early 40s, and what was I doing? Venturing into something that was unknown and uncertain, and it didn't really make any sense. But what we do know is that it all was meant to be, right? And so I just followed that thread.
I love that. Okay. So you built that trust, support, and buy-in by just following that North Star for you and walking that walk. And that's how you found the people that were part of your movement.
And I had to trust myself, even though the land of circumstances and the land of fact would give me reason not to trust it because I was diverting from something. But it's really first in trusting self. And then the trust was built person by person when someone had come into my practice and they knew they could trust me just by our conversation. And then when they came back and their symptoms were resolved, then they knew that that trust that they had instilled in me to believe in them to make the change created that circle of trust, if you will. And so I believe that I've gained trust first with self and trusting that I could do it in the land of circumstances. In fact, that showed that may not have been the right thing to do, the responsible thing to do. But it turned out to be very responsible and very right. And then I've gained trust just through the body of work I've accumulated and just the results over and over the years. And I'm so grateful that a lot of my colleagues consider the work that we do very highly, and that's a great body of humans that support the work and trust it and recommend us. So another way to know you're trusted is people recommending.
Yeah, and it can be really difficult to place that trust in yourself and to trust the process of getting to that next level when your familial unit is not supporting you, or when, like you said, some of the things around you or the facts seem to be against you. But that's why, like you said, it's so important to come back to that self-love, that knowing place, and remaining in flow, even as those obstacles may cross your path. So I love that. All right. Is there one inspiring story that tied to your movement that you'd like to share?
Oh my goodness, there's so many inspiring stories tied to my movement. I'll tell you one that was just recently sent to me. It was sent to me last week, a testimonial of a 27-year-old, and she owns a yoga studio in the metro New York area. And over the last 2 years, she had fallen really ill, and her diagnosis was Lyme and then multiple sclerosis. She did the Lyme protocol. She went gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free, and was even vegan. She went through the antibiotic regimen. She went to 30 doctors, both allopathic and functionally trained, and was only getting worse. The last doctor she went to before she found me, she was told, go to the emergency room, you may be going into organ failure. And so she was eating all the wrong foods. This young lady, the way that we do our assessment, we assessed that there was a multiple viral attack on her body, and there was a lot of mold and fungal organisms that were exacerbating the situation. And so by eating vegan, where you're eating a lot of soy products and you're eating a lot of pea protein that are mycotoxins, and she was also very sulfur and oxalate sensitive, so she was having those kale smoothies and having spinach salads. Those are sulfur and oxalates. It was actually contributing to her toxic burden, also potentially expressing her genetics through food, and definitely triggering all those pathogens to be very robust. And so you fast forward, she's been working with me for about 6 months now, but within 8 weeks, she was over 90% better. And I just saw an Instagram post. She always tags me. She's like, she is now 100% better. And the video last week just said that, once she started talking to me, she trusted me, back to that trust. I had inspired her to be hopeful, and she trusted in the process. And so again, Holly, some of these stories, they're just so heart-filling, but we say that nothing is impossible. She was told, the doctor said, and we'll release the testimonials soon, there's nothing we can do for you. We don't know what to do for you. Go to the hospital and get your organs to make sure that they're still functioning after all this, multiple interventions that weren't working for her. So again, I'm inspired daily, but that's just one of the most recent ones. So I shared that one.
That's a pretty powerful story. It's so refreshing to hear individuals like you share that it's not impossible and that's not the last stop, because I can't tell you personally how many times I've seen doctors and they're like, I don't know what to do for you. Here's, this specialist you should go see. And I'm like, well, they're out of network, so why would I see them? And so it can be very frustrating. Like, I feel like similarly to you with your son, I've been that risk person for me. Luckily, I've come across amazing people like yourself and functional medicine doctors, and I've gotten better over time. But I'm just so glad we're sharing your story and your practice for people that have not been exposed to that, and they're having these health challenges so that they can remain hopeful and reach out to you and others that specialize in helping them so that it's not the end of the road.
Indeed. Indeed.
Yeah.
And wonderful practitioners out there that can really help get to your why.
Yeah, I love that. So, Teri, we're going to move into the lightning round of questions. This has been really fun. Thank you so much for taking the time. What is your favorite book?
Oh, wow. I have a lot of favorite books. I would say Walden Pond. Walden, that book at the age of 17, um, Henry Thoreau, an existentialist, and his work, he was one of the first transcendental leaders. That book touched my soul. It really helped me think about things differently. And I refer to it today. I have a Walden on my nightstand along with many other books. So just because it was such a catalyst to inspire me at a very young age to start thinking differently.
Awesome. I love that. What networking or community group do you love most?
Oh my gosh, I have so many. It's hard to say. I mean, I love our Mindshare community. That has just been really life transforming for me. Had it not been for my introduction into JJ Virgin's community, I would not be sitting here talking to you today. Mary Morrissey's group, the group that she does with her brave thinking and her incredible, inspiring work and flow to be and think differently, that has informed my work on so many levels. I have, my group of beautiful warrior princess women that I am so grateful to be in company with. Dr. Kellyanne Petrucci, Sharon Melnick, Joan Rosenberg. Oh my goodness, Maya Sheetreat. Just the circle of just, as JJ would say, badass women who are doing such beautiful, Dr. Jolene Brighton doing such beautiful, Isabella Wentz doing such beautiful work on this planet. I'm sure I'm missing some folks, but that community of women who had their own journey and they came out of it and now are being that catalyst for millions to be and be better.
Wow, it sounds like you're definitely walking the walk of community and collaboration. So I love that. What's the best piece of advice you can share with others today?
The fact that even when we are in this pandemic where we feel like we're out of control, and although we're semi-incarcerated in our homes, that no one can have domain over our thinking. We are the greatest authority over the thoughts that we think. And the thoughts that we think will have a direct signaling impact to our genetic expression. And so we know that spontaneous healing has occurred in many, and this is when the power of thought signaled the genes to behave differently and spontaneous healing occurred. And so I'm not saying that by thinking differently, you're going to go into complete remission overnight, but it creates the opportunity and opens the door for that to be more available.
Yeah, it's amazing when you just shift your thinking from, oh, do I have the virus, to I'm healthy, I'm eating the right things, I'm doing my best. It changes your stress. You're not as stressed out, so your immune system is much healthier. So that's great. So work on your thoughts, everyone. If you could share one message with the world, what would that be?
Well, I think this is a time for hope. The universe has shown us that many of the systems that we're living in are broken and they're breaking down. And so, one, to remind us that we each have authority over our own domain. First our thinking, but then our bodies. And with that authority comes responsibility to be a better steward for our own microbiome and be a better steward for our planet, which is howling. Its cries are being heard so loudly right now that there needs to be a sea change in how we exist on the planet. And really getting back to the way that nature intended for us, really truly living the way nature intended, which is the construct of the Wilditarian movement. And I hope that everyone joins in this effort, whether you become a Wilditarian or not. It's just really having the authority and then taking the responsibility.
Yeah, I love that. In order for things to change in the world, it starts with ourselves. All right, what's the legacy that you wish to leave behind?
The legacy is my Cochrane method. I've developed a model that I believe is truly pioneering, and it's been borne out by the clinical outcomes of thousands and thousands of clients that have walked through our doors over the almost 2 decades now. And that legacy hopefully will permeate a new way of thinking about how we achieve sustainable health. And the Global Sustainable Health Institute, which I have just launched, and it's still under construction in the website, that we move into sustainable health and knowing that it does start in the womb. And so my children are a legacy of the body's ability to heal. And I believe that everyone has the authority over our own domain to achieve sustainable health. And so I hope that my legacy is sustainable health.
Well, we could certainly use sustainable health in this world and particularly in this country. So I really hope that you succeed in achieving that mission. Teri, this has been really fun, really so much wisdom, so much great information for folks out there that are struggling with their health. Great wisdom across creating a movement. Thank you so much for sharing all of that wonderful information and stories.
My great pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. So for everybody who's listening or watching right now, Teri is offering a free download of her Wilditarian 7-day detox. That's our gift to you today. This is a 7-day detox that is safe and easy to do from home. It's perfect for those who are trying to lose a few unwanted pounds, maybe from the virus right now, lower inflammation, or give their body a break from toxins commonly found in our foods. I will have a link to that so you can check that out in the download. I'll also have a link to her website so you can find that quiz to discover what type of Wilditarian you are. Additionally, we'll have all of her social media links so that you can follow Teri and follow her movement for sustainable health. With that, thank you so much for listening in on Inspiration Contagion. I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you for joining the show today. I hope you were inspired. More importantly, I hope you take action. What is one thing you can do in this moment that will inspire someone? Without action, nothing changes. Be the change you wish to see in the world. If this show truly inspired you, we ask that you share it through your network. Help us spread the light and inspiration in the world. I look forward to seeing you here next week.